Hello! What is the worst DC movie in history? Put down in the comments down below what your worst DC movie is in history. Let me know, I'll be very interested in knowing. What's mine? What's Mick's worst, most horrific DC movie of all time? Do you know? Can you take a guess? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. It's Justice League. Surely that's most of the answers I'm going to get in the comments down below. Maybe I'll get other films, It's up to you what you hate from DC movies, the collection of DC movies. I mean, look, there's lots of films that people hate out there, but for me, Justice League is the worst moment in DC movie history. No other movie, in terms of lack of quality, comes even close. Not even Superman 4, not Green Lantern, not Batman and Robin, because it isn't just the movie, Justice League, that's problematic. It's the idea of Justice League that's toxic and problematic. It takes somebody's film that's already been shot, it pretty much recycles it in the worst way possible. Yes, you can say there's moments in Justice League that you like. There's moments in Justice League that I like. I like the post-credit scene with Superman and the Flash preparing to race each other. I think that's amazing. It's a shame we never actually saw the race. That's something I'd love to see in live action, and maybe James Gunn can do it for us, because that's a really wholesome thing to see. And there's not enough wholesome stuff in entertainment today. It's all very, very culture war-y, it's all very toxic, it's all very negative, and it's all about ownership, my director, his director, her director, representation, inclusion, anger. I'm kind of fed up of all the negativity. But Justice League is an utterly problematic film in its conception, because it's trying to recycle something in the worst way possible. They were trying to reset the DC universe in the most lazy way possible. And that's by recycling somebody else's movie. I've said in the past, they could have all came out, Snyder, Whedon, Johns, and said, listen, there's been some, creative differences between Zack and ourselves, and we've decided to reset the universe, to start again. Not reset his Justice League movie, start again. I've also said in the past, Whedon's a very talented guy, so is Geoff Johns. If they started again with their own universe, by now we could have been in a very exciting place. Because although I love the Snyderverse and I love Zack Snyder, if they started again and gave me something different and something exciting at the same time, I could appreciate BVS and Man of Steel. I'd be upset if I never got to see the Snyder Cut, but at least they're being honest. At least they want to put the work in to start again and create something that's for everybody, for the many, and not for the few. I could have accepted that, and I think even Snyderverse fans and stans could have accepted that if there was a bit of honesty. But it was the dishonesty about the whole thing. And as many have written about and said on different platforms, it's the Justice League situation that hurt DC going forward. Now, it is very interesting that Aquaman made $1 billion straight after that film. It's because people enjoyed the movie. There was a lot of comic book accuracy. Momoa was great. Even Amber was great. Nicole Kidman, William Dafoe, Patrick Wilson as all. Now, some people don't like the movie and think it's a mess. But I think more often than not, people say that's a good movie. Now, Jason Momoa was very honest. He was shocked that movie made $1 billion. But he was talking about in context of smaller movies that he's made that haven't done very well. But at the end of the day, Jason, that's why the blockbuster was invented, because it's a thrill ride. A blockbuster should absolutely be a thrill ride that you can enjoy. And high art should be something else. Now, is the Snyderverse high art? I don't know if you can call the Snyderverse high art. I mean, a lot of Snyder fans think it is high art. In terms of the visuals, yeah, there's high art there. The quality level there is great. I'm not necessarily sure that the films as a whole can be looked at as high art. In terms of Batman versus Superman, I can see why people may look at it as high art. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of story, there's a lot of character development. It's very dark. I mean, you can look at it as high art, but I wouldn't go as deep as to say that the Snyderverse is high art. It's just very different, and some people just weren't ready for it. What is that? What Michael J. Fox is, Marty McFly says, near the end of the third act of Back to the Future. You are not, maybe you're not ready for this now, but your kids are going to love it. I certainly think that kids in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time are absolutely going to gobble up the Snyderverse and call for more of stuff like that. And probably Zack will be far too old. I mean, going that forward 3 or 4 or 5 decades in the future, he probably won't be alive anymore, will he? But yeah, so I love the Snyderverse. But if they were willing to be honest that there were creative differences, which there were, of course there were creative differences. There were creative differences while Zack was shooting Man of Steel. Nolan was standing there like a security guard, like Zack's bodyguard, not letting different people in, not letting Jeff Johns contribute, not letting other people saying, people are not going to like the next snapping moment. It's going to cost us $300 to $500 million at the box office. And, you know, they didn't listen. What happened? The next snapping moment cost them $300 to $500 million at the global and domestic box office, by the way. So, yeah, I think that is the worst DC movie. Because it's not just the idea that's kind of toxic and the idea of recycling somebody else's movie. I mean, in terms of art, if you draw something, right? If Picasso drew something and then someone went, nah, I'm going to redraw it, how would Picasso have felt? If Mozart's symphony or one of his symphonies, I'm not an expert on if he had many symphonies or whatever, if someone had recycled that symphony while he was alive, I'm sure Mozart wouldn't have been very happy. And this is what happened to Zack Snyder. But if you look at the movie itself, it's an absolute mess. The Steppenwolf design, the outfit, the bicycle helmet they've designed as Steppenwolf's kind of horns or whatever they are is terrible. It looks like fancy dress. It's the most embarrassing moment in DC WB history, and very embarrassing for us DC fans, because Marvel fans and other fans were mocking us as well. So, you know, it was a horrible moment. It was an embarrassing moment. It was horrible for Zack Snyder. It was horrible for the studio. And it became an element of toxicity between Snyder and the studio, because that's really when the relationship between Snyder and the studio broke down. I don't necessarily feel when Snyder was pushed away that the relationship was totally broken. I think that was more about creative differences. Zack's explained mourning his daughter was too much for him. He couldn't fight the studio and mourn his daughter, understandably, at the same time. So that's why he walked away. But I think once Justice League happened, once he saw what they did, and I mean, to be honest with you, when they came out and lied that Joss Whedon was Zack's good friend, well, Zack kind of went along with all of that. He didn't say anything, a bit like David Ayer saying there was no director's cut of the Suicide Squad, his Suicide Squad at the time. He was playing ball. As he says, he was playing the good kind of soldier. I think Zack was doing the same thing. It was history repeating itself, wasn't it? They cut Batman v Superman, half an hour of that. But, you know, the problem with Justice League, the decision to make Justice League was utterly toxic. And as I say, the film itself is bad. There's a lot of bad things about the movie. The VFX isn't great. I mean, the story itself is still kind of on similar beats. There's some things in the story that kind of differ, but not that much. But it isn't the film that Zack Snyder planned. And this is when the relationship really broke down between WB Pictures and Snyder, when he was fighting to get his movie released. Why? Because the Snyder Cut proves how bad a decision Justice League was. And I think that's when the real hatred came out. This is when Snyder's relationship with WB broke down, and then Zaslav came in and he's been a little bit more complimentary about WB, but there's still figures at WB Pictures that simply don't like Zack Snyder, and that's a problem if you ever want the Snyderverse restored. But the movie itself is utterly problematic. What was my reaction to it when I first saw it? Well, I'm not someone who notices bad things straight away. For example, I never noticed when I watched a film for the first time in the cinema that there was a problem with the upper lip CG on Cavill. I knew they'd removed the tash because that was spoken about by Henry and other people as well. But it was really bad. And this is what happens when you're rushing, because they wanted Whedon to recycle this movie and release it on the same date that Snyder was going to release his movie. And this is why Whedon was under immense pressure. That's why he took it out on the cast and crew, which he shouldn't have done. But the cast and crew weren't exactly very welcoming to Joss Whedon either. And Joss Whedon isn't one of these characters that you can do things like that to. His reaction isn't going to be good. And his reaction wasn't good. I would say that situation that happened and the treatment of the cast and crew and the fallout between the cast and crew and Whedon was nobody's and everybody's fault. The cast and crew were in love with Zack Snyder. They were making his movie. Then they could see that Whedon wanted to recycle and cut huge bits of that movie out, which upset the cast and crew, which is absolutely, utterly understandable. There's rumours that Whedon was actually mocking what Snyder was going to do. Doesn't help the situation either. So it was a very, very toxic environment. But, sets, when you're making a movie or a TV show, it's not hearts and flowers like you see on the DVD and Blu-ray extras. It's a very stressful environment. If you haven't been on a set before, it's like being in a high street at Christmas time. There's lots of different people, there's lots of different voices, and when you're dealing with artists and actors and directors, the writers will be on the set as well, so you can talk to them. They can, you can ask them where to go with this and where to go with that, and so they can, talk to the director and things like that. There's a lot of different voices, and when you're dealing with actors have an ego, and they're all about their own performances, and they have ideas themselves. So there's a lot going on for a director on a set. And if I've been in those environments, I've been on sets, I know how many people are around, how many voices they are, around. It's not an easy situation. And I think the public really don't understand what really goes on a set. And you can't change the environment of what goes on a set. It has to be that way. That's how you make stuff. So sometimes there will be arguments. Directors constantly fall out with actors and people around them. It happens because it is a stressful environment for a director, because the director is like the football manager and the referee all rolled into one. And the most important thing for a director is to be a good communicator, because you basically have to harness a performance out of your artists. They have to know what you want from them. And if you don't have those communication skills to tell them what you want from them, how can they deliver you the performance you need and want from them? And as a director myself in theatre here in Cyprus, that's a very important thing. But not just being a good communicator, but keeping that positivity up, those levels up. You want them to want to work for you. You want them to deliver their best for you. And the best way to do that is not shouting, not getting aggro. It's creating a positive environment. But let me be clear. Whether you're directing a play or whether you're directing, a movie, it doesn't matter. There will be upsets. I argue with my actors all the time. And that's okay. I mean, I'm an actor in the plays that I'm in with my Amateur Dramatic Society as well. So, I'm directing myself, I'm directing them. They have opinions about my performance, I have opinions about their performance, and sometimes it gets a little bit heated. But as long as you don't cross the line, because basically it's good that everyone's getting heated. It means they care about the play we're going to deliver. And I want nothing more than that. And when we finish rehearsals for the day, I apologise, they apologise, and we go for a beer. That's how adults work. And I think mostly in the industry, that's how they work. But sometimes, just sometimes, it crosses the line. The passions cross the line in our industry. And I think that's a shame. But when you hear people saying, oh my God, I heard it was really toxic on that set, it's always toxic on sets while you're doing the job, right? Because yeah, you can have fun, you can have a laugh and all of that. But it's a very serious business because, we take our art seriously. All of us in the industry. We want to deliver something special. We want to give the best of ourselves that we can possibly do. And that puts a kind of challenge to us, a pressure to us. I mean, it's not like working in a hospital or anything like that. It's not like being a copper, a policeman, or a doctor. And I'm not trying to say that it is. But, there's pressure there. And it can get very toxic when you're trying to deliver something for people. And, but the public don't really understand that. They've been trained to watch kind of funny moments, funny outtakes, and, fun and cozy BTS. But, they're pre-manipulated just for the public. You don't see what actually happens. Because if you saw what happened when we're rehearsing a play or when, they're shooting a movie or a TV show, you would say, what a mess. But it doesn't really matter what you see away from the camera. It only matters what's in camera. It's only important what my audience see of our play on the night. So there was a lot of toxicity on the Justice League set. People didn't want to work for Whedon. Whedon didn't want to work with the cast that he had. He would never have picked them. That's pretty obvious. They were another director's cast. They were another director's crew. So you create an almighty mess. But I don't think any other bad DC movie comes close to Justice League. And, it's a moment of shame for the industry. It's a moment of shame, especially, not the industry really, because they didn't. Well, maybe actually we can blame the industry, Rotten Tomatoes scores, cinema scores, and the pressure that studios are under to make a $1 billion movie. The pressure Warner Brothers were under to deliver just as good a franchise as the MCU and just as successful of a franchise. It's like Lois says in Man of Steel, are we just going to stand here measuring dicks? This is what happened in Warner Brothers' efforts to compete with Disney and Marvel Studios in Kevin Feige. It became a dick measuring contest. It's like me measuring my one with your one. You ain't going to measure up no matter what you do. And this is what, joking. Well, I'm not joking. I'm very proud of what I've got. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. But yeah, basically DC couldn't measure up to Marvel in cinema scores, into, Rotten Tomatoes ratings, in entertainment value and what people wanted. Because what people want from DC adaptations, when they're told this is for the mainstream audience, when we're told that Man of Steel is part of a cinematic universe, people made the assumption it would be like the MCU. And they were never told anything differently. Most people didn't know who Zack Snyder was when he was making Man of Steel. Unless you're a proper, cinephile, you wouldn't know that. And so, at the end of the day, if Zack Snyder was making kind of an Elseworld movie like kind of Todd Phillips has been doing and Matt Reeves has been doing, they would have accepted what the Snyderverse was. And I've said in previous videos from years back, if they actually told the public that this was going to be kind of, an injustice kind of thing, an injustice Superman story, which pretty much was what Snyder was attempting to do. It was an injustice story. You do see kind of the nightmare future, which is kind of loosely an adaptation on what happens in Injustice. If that was explained, I promise you, right, if Snyder stood there at the very beginning and DC and WB said, we're adapting the Injustice game, right? If they said that, because that's what the Snyderverse is, let's be serious. It's a kind of loose adaptation of the Injustice game. Even the style, even the colour palette itself is very similar to what they've done in both Injustice games. So if they said they were doing that, which let's be honest, that's what they were doing, but they didn't. They didn't feel they had to explain themselves. But Joe Blogs and Jane Blogs out there felt they were getting an MCU, and when they didn't, they were disappointed. When BVS was being marketed, it was marketed as a beat 'em up, a popcorn chomping beat 'em up. And people were disappointed because they didn't get what they thought they were going to get. But it's the industry's fault. It's WB's fault for marketing that movie the way they did. Because they were scared, really, of Batman vs. Superman, and they tried to market it into something it wasn't. When you call something Batman vs. Superman, people expect a lot of fighting between Batman and Superman. But ultimately, people were excited to see Batman and Superman throwing fists. Because the opening, the record-breaking opening at the time, proves that people wanted to see that. Unfortunately, once people saw only 9 minutes of a fight, a brilliant, outstanding fight, but nothing else, then it was clear that Batman vs. Superman, in its inception, was more than Batman and Superman fighting. And that's obvious. So I don't think that Batman vs. Superman was actually the problem. The problem was the movie the public was sold wasn't the movie they got. And that's always a problem. When expectations are not reached, and expectations, fans always blame for having expectations and, blaming creative, should I say, for not giving them what they thought they were going to get. But when studios are selling a movie in a certain way, and then when the public don't get that movie, I think that's where the problem is. And those were the consequences. And this is why we got to Justice League. You want to know why we got to Justice League? Because we had a writer like David Goyer. We had someone like Christopher Nolan. We had someone like Zack Snyder who want to tell their stories in a very different way. I like those people. I like Man of Steel. I love BVS. I love the Snyder Cut. That's not the issue. When you're putting people like this in charge of something you're calling a cinematic universe, the public makes certain assumptions, and this is why we got to Justice League. The next snapping moment of Zod. Why we got to Justice League. BVS and what they did with Superman in that movie. A more somber Superman, even more somber than he was in MOS. At least he smiled a few times. At least he felt like Superman in MOS, right? Again, I love BVS, but it wasn't the movie people expected or mostly wanted. Even though I love that movie. So these are all the reasons that we got to Justice League, the worst DC movie ever made. And the consequences to the DCEU are there to see. But even so, people all came in to watch Aquaman because it was an epic, huge, exciting movie. I think what it killed the DCEU beyond that was after Aquaman, we got small, cheap movies. And this was Hamada's idea. Shazam is a small, cheap movie. Wonder Woman 84 is a small, cheap movie. Birds of Prey is a small, cheap movie, right? And it goes on. Blue Beetle is a small, cheap movie. The Flash is not a small, cheap movie, but it's also a very, very problematic, underwhelming movie as well. And it isn't what people expected. It's a terrible adaptation of Flashpoint. On its own, you could say, well, it was all right. VFX, very problematic, of course, but it was nothing special. And so you take something that started with Snyder, with huge epic movies, and then James Wan's huge epic Aquaman, and then what you get smaller, cheaper movies. And basically, you get the conundrum of Joker being in between, kind of the Hamadaverse, and that being a movie that everybody loved, because that movie was cheap, it didn't cost a lot of money, but you can't tell it's cheap because it's not a VFX extravaganza. It's all about the acting, the dialogue, the storytelling, the characterization, and that's what matters with that movie. Same with The Batman, a very brilliant Batman movie. Matt Reeves did a great job and it made good, solid money. 770 million is solid money for a film that cost around 100 million. I'm not going to be adding the COVID costs and the costs of the delays. That would be cheating. So that movie did well for what it cost to make at the end of the day. And we're getting more Joker and we're getting more of Matt Reeves' The Batman universe. And that's what I'm really excited about right now. We speak about Superman Legacy on most days. I'm excited about Superman Legacy. I'm excited about what James Gunn could potentially give us, but without seeing what he's going to give us, without having any idea in what he's going to give us. And I think we've got more of an idea what DCU is now. So I'm a little bit more positive and excited about that. But there's a lot of things. There was a lot of anomalies that led to Justice League. And I think it's like everything in life. You can't just blame WB. You can't just blame Joss Whedon. I think everyone should take blame for Justice League. Everyone. Everyone involved since Man of Steel were pushing in different directions. And nobody could sit round the table and say, let's agree to disagree. Can we agree that maybe we shouldn't snap Zod's neck? I think that would have been okay, right? I mean, is it really that important that Superman kills Zod? Because it was never referenced again in the Snyderverse, was it? It was never referenced in BVS. It was never referenced in the Snyder Cut, unless I'm wrong. Superman didn't seem to learn anything from it. Now, if David Goyer got to write Man of Steel 2, I'm quite sure it would have been referenced and it would have been deemed as a lesson that Superman would never want to feel that way and kill again. Then it's an okay thing. It's a good story beat, but still a bit risky to have Superman killing Zod, especially in that way. And I think it could have been one of those things that they could have dropped. So what if they didn't have the neck snapping moment? I think if they don't have this neck snapping moment, as I've said many a times, that film could have made 300 to 500 million more at the box office. And I think if that movie makes $1 billion, Nolan and Goyer stay on board to pen the story of Man of Steel 2. We don't get BVS, and even though I love BVS, at the end of the day, BVS was hugely damaging to the DCEU. It would be a shame to live without that movie and Zack's vision of that movie, but you've got to put DC first, and you've got to put these characters first. You know, it's all very well being there for a director, and I love Snyder, and I love the way he makes movies, and I love the way he thinks about movies. But if you're making a cinematic universe, you've got to put the IP and these iconic characters, you know, pre-existing characters, before your self-indulgent storytelling needs. And I think that's what was the problem with the DCEU from Man of Steel. You had people like Goyer, who were very self-indulgent with the stories they were telling. And I think Snyder and Terrio were very self-indulgent with the story they were telling in BVS, even though I loved the movie and appreciate the movie. I put myself, you know, and think about all DC fans and what they all want. And I don't just think about myself. It's not just about making a good movie. It's about representing these characters in the right way. And this is what Dick Donner did. He put his own needs. You know, he didn't put his own, he put the needs of the character, you know, in front of his own storytelling needs. You know, Dick Donner could have done different things in Superman the movie, but he didn't. He let Superman be Superman. Maybe he doesn't like Superman the way he is, but he felt that was so important for the audience and for America, because Superman is a part of American mythology, whether you like it or not. You may not like Superman saving a cat from a tree, but it's part of who he is. You may not like him being a pure-hearted, positive character that cracks the odd joke. That's who Superman is. He has a pure heart. That's who Superman is. Now, if you want Superman to be something else, I've said this before, you need to consume The Boys and Homelander. But that's not who Superman is. I'm not saying that's what Zack Snyder's Superman was, but at times it came pretty close. Not only, you know, I mean, if you think about what was going on in BVS, but when you look about the plan beyond the Snyder Cut, Superman was going to be controlled by Darkseid. And he was going to be doing a lot of bad shit. We saw some of that bad shit in the nightmare sequence in BVS, where it looks like he was about to finish Batman off, and the way he was heat visioning those prisoners. That was controversial. People don't want to see Superman doing that. That's a Homelander thing. And I think that's the problem. And I think this is part of the thing that James Gunn will have to do, is to show people that he's going to keep Superman as Superman. But there's no question about it. And yeah, we can have a debate in the comments down below, but for me, Justice League is the worst film in DC history.